Is the USA being hypocritical? For decades, the United States argued that some countries should never be allowed to enrich uranium. Now, the United States has officially signed a landmark civilian nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia that could allow Saudis to enrich uranium on their own soil. So, is the America changing its own rules? Or has the world changed so much that the old rules no longer work? Let's find out. Here is something almost everyone gets wrong. The United States has never been against nuclear power. France runs on it, Japan uses it, even the United Arab Emirates built 4 nuclear reactors with American support. So the problem was never nuclear energy. The real debate has always been uranium enrichment. Because once a country develops the technology to enrich uranium, that same technology can produce fuel for nuclear power plants. But if taken much farther, it can also produce material for a nuclear weapon. That's why this story matters. The United States recently signed a 30-year nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom wants nuclear power. That part isn't controversial. What's controversial is that the agreement leaves open possibility for Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium on its own soil instead of permanently giving up that right. At first, that may not sound like a big deal until you remember for years the United States opposed Iran's uranium enrichment program and led international efforts to isolate it. The United States also blocked India from much of the global civilian nuclear market for decades after its nuclear tests. So why does Saudi Arabia appear to be getting a different treatment? Before we answer that, there's another question we need to answer first. Why does Saudi Arabia even want nuclear power? The first answer might surprise you. Oil. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's biggest oil exporters, but it also burns a lot of that at home to produce electricity. Think about that for a second. Every barrel burned inside Saudi Arabia is one less barrel it can sell to the rest of the world. That's a difficult trade-off when oil exports are one of the country's biggest sources of income. Instead of burning valuable oil to keep the lights on, Saudi Arabia could use nuclear reactors for electricity and export more oil instead. There's another reason. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan aims to diversify its economy so it isn't dependent on oil forever, because sooner or later it's going to end and electricity demand keeps rising. Growing cities, more industries, air conditioning in one of the hottest places on earth, even massive desalination plants that turn seawater into drinking water consume enormous amounts of electricity. Nuclear power can help meet that demand without burning more oil, so wanting nuclear power isn't unusual. A lot of countries do. But this raises an obvious question. If Saudi Arabia only wants electricity, why not simply buy nuclear fuel from another country like many nations already do? Why insist on enriching uranium at home? Saudi Arabia says it wants the full nuclear fuel cycle because relying on someone else for your nuclear fuel is great until that someone decides they don't like you anymore. Just ask Russia how quickly the world can cut you off. Supporters call it energy independence. Critics point out there's another reason. Nuclear weapons are better security guarantee than a suitcase full of diplomatic promises. So what is uranium enrichment? Let's make this as simple as possible. When uranium comes out of the ground, it's actually not very useful for most of the nuclear reactors. More than 99% of it is uranium-238. Only about 0.7% is uranium-235, and uranium-235 is the isotope most reactors use as fuel. Uranium enrichment simply means increasing that tiny percentage. Now, before someone in the comments asks where did I learn all this? No, I did not become a nuclear engineer overnight. Most of my knowledge came from watching this. Thankfully, reality is more complicated. The machines that do the enrichment are called centrifuges. Imagine a giant washing machine spinning so fast that it separates two almost identical forms of uranium. The lighter uranium-235 slowly gets concentrated. The heavier uranium-238 gets left behind. Repeat the process thousands of times and the enrichment level keeps increasing. Here's why the numbers matters. Natural uranium contains about 0.7% uranium-235. Most nuclear power plants use fuel enriched to around 3 to 5%. At around 20%, governments become much more concerned because the material is considered highly enriched. At around 60%, you are much closer to weapons grade. At roughly 90%, it's considered weapons grade uranium. But here's something many people misunderstand. The biggest challenge isn't necessarily going from 60% to 90%. The biggest challenge is building enrichment capability in the first place. Once a country has mastered centrifuges, trained engineers, and built the infrastructure, it has already crossed the hardest part. That's why governments often worry more about the capability than the exact percentage. Now here is another interesting fact. Countries don't actually need to enrich uranium themselves to have nuclear power. France imports most of its uranium. Japan imports almost all of its uranium. South Korea also depends heavily on imports. In fact, it is completely normal for uranium to be mined in one country, enriched in another, made fuel into somewhere else, used inside a reactor in a fourth country. So this isn't about whether Saudi Arabia can get nuclear fuel. It absolutely can. The real question is, why do governments get nervous when another country wants to enrich uranium themselves? The answer is one word you will hear over and over again: proliferation. Proliferation simply means more countries gaining the technology, materials, or knowledge that could eventually be used to build nuclear weapons. The fear is that once one country gains the sensitive nuclear technology, others may want the same exception. Think of it like a school allowing one student to bring calculator in the exam. Soon everyone else starts asking, why not me? That's how governments often think about uranium enrichment. One exception leads to more exceptions. And that's exactly why the Saudi agreement has attracted so much attention. Because the debate isn't really about the nuclear power. It's about whether America is changing its policy it defended for decades. And to understand why that might be happening, we need to look at beyond Saudi Arabia. So if uranium enrichment has been one of America's biggest red lines for decades, why would it even consider making an exception? This new agreement with Saudi Arabia is very different from previous civilian nuclear deals America has signed. To see why, look at the agreement between America used as a benchmark for years, the UAE deal. In 2009, the UAE agreed never to enrich uranium on its own soil. It also accepted strict international inspections under what is known as IAEA Additional Protocol. That became known as the gold standard Washington wanted everyone else to follow. Saudi Arabia's new deal throws out that gold standard. It does not require Saudi Arabia to permanently give up uranium enrichment, and it doesn't force the kingdom to adopt those extra IAEA inspection protocols either. That's why many non-proliferation experts see this as a significant shift, not because Saudi Arabia wants nuclear reactors, but because America appears more willing to negotiate on an issue that it once treated as almost non-negotiable. So what changed now? The answer is simple. The world is very different from the world 20 or 30 years ago. Back then, if America opposed a country's nuclear ambition, it had enormous influence over who could supply reactors, fuel, and technology. Take India for example. After India's nuclear tests, the United States played a leading role in blocking India from much of the global civilian nuclear market for decades. It wasn't America alone. It worked with other major suppliers through international exports control for a long time. That strategy worked. But eventually, America itself changed course. As India became strategically more important, Washington supported a special waiver in 2008 that allowed India back into civilian nuclear trade. The rules didn't suddenly disappear. Its strategic interests had changed. The same question appearing again, this time with Saudi Arabia. There's another reason this debate looks different today. 20 years ago, America had far fewer competitors in exporting nuclear technology. Today, China has built one of the world's fastest growing nuclear industries. Right now, China has more nuclear reactors under construction than any other country. It has developed a reputation for building reactors faster than many Western projects, which have often faced years of delays and rising costs. And China isn't keeping that experience at home. It has already built nuclear reactors in Pakistan. It continues to expand its nuclear exports. So if Saudi Arabia wants reactors, Washington knows it isn't the only country that can help build them anymore. Here's something people often miss. A nuclear reactor isn't like selling someone a car. Once you build a reactor, the relationship doesn't end. It begins. The reactor needs fuel, maintenance, replacement parts, software updates, engineering support, safety inspections, training for operators. All of that can continue for decades. Many nuclear reactors operate for 60 years or even longer. So when a country chooses who builds its first reactor, it is often choosing a long-term strategic partner. This isn't just about the electricity, it's about influence. But then, the story took another unexpected turn. Just one day after the agreement was signed, President Trump said Saudi Arabia would have to join the Abraham Accords before the deal moves forward. which normalizes diplomatic relations between Israel and Arab countries before the deal moves forward. So even now, there is still major questions about what the final deal will actually look like, and Congress still has to review it. So is America being hypocritical? Maybe. Or maybe this is what happens when geopolitics changes. For decades, Washington tried to limit who could access sensitive nuclear technology. Today, it has to compete with other countries that are willing to sell it. So what do you think? If you were making this decision, would you stick to the old rules even if it pushed Saudi Arabia towards China or Russia? Or would you make an exception to keep an important ally closer? Let me know what you think in the comments.